This meeting was not a secret, and the findings not exactly new. Don't believe me? Here's the headline from the Washington Post on January 6th of 2017. Declassified report says Putin ordered effort to undermine faith in U.S. election and help Trump. So what can we glean from the New York Times repackaging a report just days after the president's much criticized meeting with Vladimir Putin? First, let's look at some of the key officials who were in that meeting. John Brennan, the CIA director at the time, James Clapper, the director of national intelligence at the time, and at the time, the FBI director, James Comey. Second, let's take a look at what these men have been saying since the Trump-Putin summit.
What Mr. Trump did yesterday was to betray the women and men of the FBI, the CIA, NSA, and others, and to betray the American public. And that's why I use the term that this is nothing short of treasonous, because it is a betrayal of the nation.
This president and this presidency, and who is assaulting the values and institutions and standards of this country, which collectively we've spent decades defending.
And here is what Jim Comey tweeted. This Republican Congress has proven incapable of fulfilling the founders' design that ambition must counteract ambition. All who believe in this country's values must vote for Democrats this fall. Policy differences don't matter right now. History has its eyes on us. So what might someone reasonably deduce given that above information? Wouldn't it be fair to believe that perhaps the president was the victim of a coordinated leak, one that was orchestrated to inflict maximum damage to him? To answer these questions, let's bring in former CIA officer Jeff Beatty, former CIA chief of station Dan Hoffman, as well as radio host and former aide to Chuck Schumer, Chris Hahn. Gentlemen, thank you so much for being here. Look, these three people at the head of our intelligence agencies at the time have now all exposed their political leanings to the left and to the Democrats. And I'll start with you, Daniel. You're sitting here with me here in studio. Is that an unreasonable assumption? Is that a leap to suggest that maybe these gentlemen used their intelligence backgrounds to maybe push the table in Hillary's direction?
I mean, it's possible you could speculate that. I would just start with John Brennan because he was my boss at CIA. I served in Moscow for 5 years. I know him well. And I'll have to be truthful. He and I always didn't agree on everything. There were lots of times I told him things he needed to know and didn't want to hear, and he didn't always react favorably. I think his partisan remarks might have been taken with maybe a little bit more positively if he admitted some of the mistakes from the Obama administration, like the very ill-fated and naive reset policy. Those who are criticizing this administration for not being tough on Russia might want to look in the mirror and just talk about some of those lessons learned.
Now, Jeff, I believe it was Director Comey who said he doesn't do sneaky things. He said he doesn't leak. He says he doesn't do Weasley moves, but then we see in his own words and his own actions that he actually did do those things. How can he have any credibility, and would he be up to doing such a thing as leaking this information?
I would certainly say it's possible. You know, there's my colleague from the agency will recognize this saying. There's an old saying, and it's kind of a joke, that it goes, admit nothing, deny everything, make counter accusations. And that's what we've been seeing play out on a grand scale. You know, when you go back, this all started timing-wise with Hillary and her email scandal. And nothing was admitted initially. Hillary denied everything, saying I had nothing that was classified. Then I had nothing that was marked classified. You know, it just was a series, and now it's make counter accusations. They realized that they needed to go on the attack because they were really hanging out there, because Hillary had to be getting emails on this unauthorized system by her peers. Now, who were her peers? The president, perhaps, and even others. So there's a lot of people being protected.
Now, Chris, the context here is, I think everybody thought that Hillary Clinton was going to get elected on election night. The Trump saw something that maybe the rest of us didn't see, but they did get elected. And then the media and the apparatus, the deep state, they just started going nuts. So when you hear these accusations, how do you respond to that?
I'm listening to these guys. I'm like, we're talking about Hillary's emails today. We want to know what happened in Helsinki. And I'm old enough to remember when there was a chairman of the House Oversight Committee named Jason Chaffetz, who would have looked into this with a fine-tooth comb and had done his duty as a member of Congress and put a reasonable check on the President of the United States. If Hillary's emails are still the issue, Hillary's emails is why Hillary's not president of the United States. The FBI's actions in investigating Hillary and reopening the investigation 10 days, that proves that James Comey was not in the bag for Hillary. In fact,
who was Hillary emailing? She wasn't emailing herself.
I'll let you talk. I'll let you talk. I'll let you talk.
Chris, do you believe...
It doesn't matter at this point.
It
doesn't matter at this point. We have a president of the United States who, at the very best, looked weak in front of Putin on Monday. At the worst, is something we don't even want to talk about because it's so far down a rabbit hole.
I want to play a quote.
Members of Congress and these.
Chris, I'm going to play a quote from President Obama that happened before the election, and I know you've heard it, but listen to this quote.
There is no serious person out there who would suggest somehow that you could even rig America's elections, in part because they're so decentralized and the numbers of votes involved.
So, Chris, these same three characters, Brennan and Clapper and Comey, they were in charge when this type of hacking and attack happened. And there are a lot of us that think maybe what they're trying to do now is deflect and distract because of the fact that all of a sudden they're being called out for this, and they didn't do their jobs back when they were in charge.
Jason, you're clearly not suggesting that the Russians didn't try to interfere with our election.
I do think they had charge. I do think they did it, and I don't think, but I don't think that Brennan and Clapper and Comey have come clean on that.
The president doesn't think it. Okay, whatever. Let's have a congressional hearing and bring them in along with the DNI that's there now and other members that can answer these questions. Congress should be holding hearings like the hearings you held about Benghazi, like the hearings you held about her email server. We need to have hearings on what's going on with the Russians and how they're trying to influence the election
Devin
right
Nunes,
now. For some
the
reason,
chairman of the chairman of the Intel Committee, has been talking about this for years.
By somebody.
He's been talking about it for years, and those gentlemen have testified multiple times. They have had
a hearing.
And these three people came to Congress and misled the American people in Congress. Jeff, let me go to you.
I don't believe that. I don't believe that.
I do. I really do. Jeff, your experience, CIA, is it possible that they didn't know these things? And why would President Obama go to great lengths to tell the world that there was nothing like this happening?
I think, of course, they knew. They knew that this was going on. But I think it was another failure on Brennan's part, primarily. He was the director of Central Intelligence. You know, he underestimated the threat, and he failed. He failed to protect the system. Okay, so we could have hearings about that. But the reason you asked the question earlier, Jason, about why did people go nuts after Trump was elected is because you heard the rhetoric during the election, lock her up. There was so much wrongdoing that was going on that the opposition, the resistance, had to go on the offensive to try to make the Trump administration play defense. And that's what they tried to do. You know, one other thing real quickly. This all goes back to really a stupid decision when Hillary attacked in 2011 the legitimacy of his election. And did she think that she could try to undermine his credibility, his election, his process without
what are we supposed to do? Be all for rubber stamp election? Shouldn't we stand for democracy around the world?
The reality is, I think the Russians and others tried to hack into the Republican systems, but they were pushed back because they actually had some security on them.
And
that's part of the reason. And the reason the Democrats don't want to give up their server or anything else is because they wouldn't let the FBI look at it. But Daniel, I want to get your take. Who do you concur with here? How do you view this?
First I have to say Secretary Clinton was absolutely right to call out Russia for election violations, human rights violations. Russia considers the United States its main enemy. They have been running these sorts of operations for years against us. They ran a massive cyber attack against the Estonians and then against Georgia in 2008 and against Ukraine. So we knew they were doing it to others. We knew they were doing it to us. We did not effectively counter Russia and deter them. And that's what my concern is.
Chris, you're going to get the last word here. But that's why so many of us were frustrated with Barack Obama and Hillary Clinton and that silly little reset button, because they tried to downplay all that. They mocked Mitt Romney. And you have these people that were in the professional intelligence agencies telling us everything was all right, and it wasn't. And you only started saying it wasn't once Donald Trump became the president.
And it turns out that Mitt Romney was right, and that's why the Russians, through Maria Butina, blocked him from becoming Secretary of State. And there should be a hearing to figure that out.
Yeah, Mitt Romney was right.
It turns out that Mitt Romney was right.
Flat out wrong.
Look. One of the things I like about you, Jason, is you're a former place kicker just like me, and we know better. We want to know the truth, and I want to know what happened, and I'm sure you do too, and I hope Congress does its job.
Fair enough. Gentlemen, thank you. I appreciate it. As the Director of National Intelligence, Dan Coats is President Trump's top spy. But for how long? That's the big question tonight after Director Coats made these comments about the Helsinki comment today that couldn't have made the president very happy.
I wished he had made a different statement, but I think that now that has been clarified. I don't know what happened in that meeting. I think as time goes by, and the president has already mentioned some things that happened in that meeting, I think we will learn more. But that is the president's prerogative. If he had asked me how that ought to be conducted, I would have suggested a different way. But that's not my role. That's not my job. So it is what it is.
Joining me now for reaction is Republican Congressman Ron DeSantis, who is running for governor in Florida. I had the pleasure of serving with Ron in the Congress and on the Oversight Committee and also on the Judiciary Committee. So, Congressman, thank you for joining us. What's your reaction to what Director Coats was saying, and have you started the countdown clock on how long he might have his job?
Well, good to see you, Jason. You know, I have a lot of respect for Dan Coats. I think he served the country honorably. I have confidence in him in terms of his capabilities. I just wonder whether that Aspen Festival is the right place to be talking about that. I mean, if you had concerns, you know, just bring it to the president. But to do it in front of that crowd, you know, I didn't necessarily think that was the right way to go.
You know, Congressman, you and Jim Jordan, and Mark Meadows, John Ratcliffe, Trey Gowdy, I mean, the list is long. You've been trying to extract documents from these people, and yet we see them all in Aspen. I guess is they didn't take a Delta flight or Southwest to get there. How is it that I mean, how does that make you feel when you see all these people hanging out in Aspen, but you can't get them to come to Capitol Hill?
Well, it's frustrating, but Jason, I mean, you know why this is happening. I mean, you and I tried to bring accountability to the IRS commissioner when he was pulling a lot of the same stuff. We tried to actually impeach him. We didn't get the support that we needed throughout the entire House of Representatives. And I think the same thing here is we've not yet imposed a sanction on Rosenstein. So if you say you want these documents, which we definitely are entitled to, set a date to hold him in contempt if he doesn't produce it. Instead, it's kind of back and forth. And I think he's just running out the clock on this stuff. I don't think he wants to comply with what we're asking for.
Well, I'm no longer in Congress. You are. So why haven't you dropped that? I mean, the clock is ticking. You literally have days before the next election. You're in a handful of days. Is there anything that's actually going to happen?
Well, we should do it, and I've been arguing for months. Let's just set that contempt date. If we don't have the documents, we hold them, we proceed to do it. If we do have the documents, then we cancel the hearing. So that's what we should do. Will we do it? I don't know. I just don't know the answer to that because, as you know, you need to get a certain amount of members who get on board for doing that. But if we could get that information, I think that would shed a lot of light on a lot of the problems that we've seen and really just scratch the surface of identifying with people like Peter Strzok and his anti-Trump bias as really the mover and shaker behind this whole collusion narrative.
Now, before the president showed up in Helsinki for the summit with Mr. Putin, there were some indictments that were dropped. Do you think those actually do anything? And what did you make of the timing of those indictments?
I don't think they'll end up doing anything because I don't think anyone's going to actually be there to ever stand trial for them. And so I think if you're going to deal with, and first of all, we've responded to Russia's cyber activity. You and I supported sanctions at the beginning of the Congress. I'd be willing to do more, but I think the political response is probably more effective. I mean, to just do an indictment and then never try the case, I think it was more for show, and I don't think it's actually going to amount to very much. And most of the information in that indictment was exactly what Devin Nunes' committee had identified several months ago. So we didn't really learn very much new in the indictment.
You know, one of the things that nobody in the media seems to be talking about is upon the return, President Trump really walked out of there with tens of billions of dollars in commitment from our NATO partners to beef up the forces on those that are pro-USA and maybe not so pro-Russia. And that doesn't get talked about. But is there anything else that you and Congress is going to be able to do to fortify the president and continue to push NATO?
Well, look, I'm a supporter of NATO, but at the same time, NATO's status quo, there's problems with NATO. Trump, obviously, has been very forceful in identifying the failure of some of our European allies to maintain appropriate defense levels. Look, I have concerns about Turkey's role in NATO. If you look at what Erdogan is doing with just being an Islamist and then now recently with the controversy. So I think it's healthy to be trying to push this in a different direction. But we all are all committed to NATO, and I think the president's committed to NATO as well.
Congressman, thank you. Ron DeSantis in Florida tonight. Thank you very much. President Trump says the media wants a war with Russia. We'll tell you why coming up next. It's been more than 3 days since Trump's meeting with Putin in Helsinki, but the media are still in a frenzy over the whole ordeal. Frustrated with the negative coverage, President Trump said this morning that the media wants a war with Russia. And from some of the hysterics seen in the last 24 hours, he may not be wrong.
President Trump is not taking the interests of the country first, is taking his personal interest or some other interest first. It made me wonder if people are suspicious that he revealed sensitive classified intelligence, including human source information, to the president of the Russian Federation. That's a real concern.
Meddling is an inadequate word to describe what Russia did here. Meddling is something your mother-in-law might do in your marriage. This was an attack. This was an attack upon American democracy.
Which is the word he used earlier this week, but you are absolutely correct, sir. Attack U.S. democracy.
Joining me now for analysis is Howard Kurtz, host of Media Buzz, which airs Sundays at 11 a.m. Eastern, right here on the Fox News channel. Thank you so much for being here. I appreciate it. But what's your take? I mean, I see a lot of hysteria, but I'm a partisan Republican. I get that. But is there really, I mean, come on, they've lost their marbles, haven't they?
Well, let's start with this. President Trump made a serious mistake in Helsinki, and he tried the next day to clarify it. And the media reaction was, not happening, no do-over for you. They have tried to minimize and mock what he has said. It's a hostage tape. He wasn't sincere. It was done with a wink and a nod. One CNN anchor said, do you think we Americans are stupid? And so when you hear all of that, the bottom line here is that, look, it's fine to be skeptical, but the bottom line is that they don't want to, they want to keep this furor going. They don't, and they want to keep the moral condemnation going.
How do they seem to be so coordinated? I mean, when I look at it and I look across the spectrum, it's not just one or two, but they seem to be coordinated. And there seem to be some buzzwords that suddenly catch on. Does anybody have any idea how that happens so simultaneously?
Well, look, it's no secret that much of the media does not like this president, doesn't agree with his policies, doesn't agree with his style. So some of the buzzwords is where it goes over the top. For example, he's being accused of treason. He's being called a traitor. For messing up a press conference. Suddenly he's Benedict Arnold. And I think that when that kind of hysterical overreaction happens, and again, I think the criticism was legitimate in the beginning. Many conservatives were critical of the president, including some of your former Republican colleagues on the Hill, including some people here at Fox. But that kind of hysterical overreaction convinces half the country that there's no way that the media can be fair to this guy, and it just raises basic questions about fairness and balance.
It really does play into the president's hands, doesn't it? I mean, there are times that I think that some of the things that the president will do and tweet about are done to just poke the media, because it does expose them for who they really are and the biases that they really have.
Oh, he loves to poke the media, and all too often the media fall into the trap. So, you know, if he makes a mistake, a misstatement, something like that, and sometimes it can be a 10. But then the media go to 11, they go to 13, they go to 15.
But how does that, I mean, what happened to journalism in this country? I want to play a clip that President Trump said, but I didn't see much, if any, coverage on this.
Getting along with President Putin, getting along with Russia is a positive, not a negative. Right. Now, with that being said, if that doesn't work out, I'll be the worst enemy he's ever had. The worst he's ever had.
Now, that was a live broadcast, and I think the president's right to do that because he can go out unfiltered, much like when he went out on the North Lawn and he talked to Mr. Ducey there from Fox and Friends.
Right.
That was it
was unscripted.
I think that was the president probably at the best.
Yeah.
But does the media have any semblance of any responsibility to play a clip that puts into balance how he says, I'll be Putin's worst nightmare?
Yeah, and then you can comment on it. Absolutely. Now, I don't agree with President Trump when he says the media want war with Russia, which we like fistfights, but somebody ends up with a bloody nose. But I do think that clips like the ones you play, what's happening now is the media narrative, and everyone in the press feels vindicated. They're even being asked, what used to be on the fringes, Jason, is now being asked in mainstream publications and mainstream segments. What does Putin have on Trump? Why won't he be tougher? And so when you have that attitude, if the president says, oh, he'll be my worst enemy, it doesn't work out, it tends to get minimized, dismissed. And this is where I think the constant hostility toward this president, not everybody, and some of these people are opinion folks, and some of them are former Obama folks who have contracts now at MSNBC and CNN. But that's where you see the narrative going. And again, the criticism justified, in my view, in the beginning, but now you see an effort to whip it up, to go to 15, to use words like treason, and I think that goes too far.
It does. Howard, I'm honored that you would come and be here, and don't tell anybody. I'm just kind of faking it as a newscaster here.
It'll just be our secret.
All right, thank you. I appreciate it. And Media Buzz, Sundays, 11 a.m.
Thanks.
Speaking of Russia, it may not be just the media who want a war. The Democrats are suggesting the president jeopardize national security in his closed-door meeting with Trump and are suddenly starting to sound like neoconservatives.
Did the president make concessions to Putin? Did the president share classified information with Putin? Did the president take other steps beyond those that he took so publicly to undermine the security of the United States? This is what prompted this discussion of Montenegro recently. That's a high priority of Vladimir Putin's. And to have the President of the United States say, why should we risk people over Montenegro? That's exactly what the Kremlin wants to hear.
Here to react is Congressman Andy Biggs, a Republican from Mesa, Arizona, and Congressman John Garamendi, a Democrat from California. Gentlemen, thank you for being here. I had the honor and privilege of serving with both of you in this Congress, and I appreciate you coming and joining us tonight to give us a bipartisan perspective. Congressman Garamendi, I'll give you the first word here. For a president to go and meet with a Russian president is a good thing, isn't it? And do you think that the Democrats are taking it way, way too far when they start talking about treason and those types of things?
Well, there's no doubt, and your previous guest, Howard, I said it very, very well. The president really did mess up in his press conference. There's no doubt about that. What actually happened in the 2 hours is extremely important. Right now, we're in the process of writing the final version of the annual National Defense Authorization Act. We do know that the president just 4 months ago said Russia and China were our principal adversaries. What happened in that 4-hour meeting that we need to know as we finish it up? Do we have to change the directions that we're setting? Do we have to provide different money for different armaments or less money for some armaments? We don't know that. So that secret meeting is of serious concern going forward for the policies that Congress has to enact and the money that we have to appropriate. Similarly, we've not yet heard from a confidential classified briefing on Singapore or the NATO conference itself. So there's things that this administration needs to share with Congress. As to the ongoing controversy, well, the president just continues to cause it.
Let me bring in Andy Biggs, Congressman Biggs.
Sure.
You know, when I hear the Democrats suddenly getting tough on Russia, and they sound like warmongers. I mean, they've morphed into a totally different party than I've ever heard or seen in the past. I mean, you had President Obama saying there's no threat, that, hey, they just need a little more time, then they can negotiate. You had Hillary with the reset button. How do you view it on the floor of the House?
Well, I think it's true that they've changed their philosophical bent, and I don't think it's permanent, because I always thought of them as neoliberal institutionalists. What I mean by that is they viewed themselves as finding some great allegiance, and I'm not classifying everybody, but most of them, they viewed themselves as having allegiance to these multilateral institutions like the United Nations, like NATO, and what have you. And now what they're spinning out is, wait a second, Russia's this tremendous enemy, and now we need to make sure that we're protecting nations like Montenegro, and there's this mystery going on here. I think they've spun themselves up so much because they don't like President Trump that they've actually changed their fundamental understanding of who they are from a philosophical point of view.
Congressman Garamendi, how do you feel about that? Because a lot of people have said those types of things.
Well, whatever they're saying, Andy says, have I changed my fundamental understanding of where I am? The reality is that the Democrats have said forever that we need a strong and wise military, wise in the sense of how we use that military. And I voted for continuing on the Armed Services Committee for the National Defense Authorization Acts. I do have questions about where the money is spent and whether it's spent wisely, and that's my job. But
John,
it is the president himself, if I might just a moment, the president himself that said Russia is our principal adversary. That was the national defense policy that was emanated by him just a couple of months ago. Now, the Montenegro thing is extremely important.
Congressman, and I have the greatest respect for you, and you're one of the nicest gentlemen that I've ever interacted with on either side of the aisle. But I got to tell you, the Democrats, under Barack Obama, every single time we turned around, the only thing they were willing to cut was the defense budget. It's only been President Trump and the Republicans that have pushed that budget up. And they went to great lengths to mock Mitt Romney and others for even suggesting what Devin Nunes said, which is that our geopolitical foe was Russia.
Well, the facts, yes, we want to have a wise expenditure of the taxpayers' money. And let's face it, there are many things that the military does that one should appropriately question whether that is the appropriate expenditure of the taxpayer money. On the other hand, this Montenegro thing speaks to the heart of NATO. NATO is extraordinarily important to America because it brings together the European countries.
We're going to have to come back and have another Montenegro segment, but I want to get Congressman Biggs in here for the last word. Last word to Congressman Biggs here. How do you see this going forward?
Well, I see the philosophical bent has changed. It truly has. And the idea that we're going to now ratchet up the rhetoric and potentially cause a firestorm, that's really not where the Democrats have been. They actually emasculated the military under the previous administration. Maybe not John, because he is a great guy, but I mean his party did and the administration did, and we've had to build that back up. And I think President Trump is saying, look, Russia's a foe, but we are better off if we're going to have these negotiations and we can find points of commonality. That's what I think is so important, and that's why I find it very interesting that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are spinning this out of control. And moreover, the media is casting this strange narrative of treason. It's absolutely wild.
Congressman, thank you both. I truly do appreciate it, but we do have to go.
Thank you.
The story the left does not want you to hear about, Hillary Clinton's emails. That's up next. Welcome back. The media can't stop talking about Trump and Russia hacking. But what about Hillary? A quick history lesson. Back in 2015, the intelligence community issued a security referral, not a criminal referral, regarding the classified emails on Hillary's server. A letter from the inspectors general of the intelligence community and the State Department at the time wrote, these emails were not retroactively classified by the State Department. Rather, these emails contained classified information when they were generated, and according to IC classification officials, that information remains classified today. This classified information should never have been transmitted via an unclassified personal system. Fast forward to last month, when the DOJ released its Inspector General report on the investigation, which published the FBI's own internal file review. It said, quote, the FBI's Inspection Division successfully determined, remember that part, successfully determined, classified information was improperly stored and transmitted on Clinton's email server, and classified information was compromised by unauthorized individuals to include foreign governments or intelligence services, adding that, quote, treatment of the investigation as a traditional espionage matter rather than a criminal investigation significantly hindered the ability of the investigative team to obtain full and accurate and timely information. As if things couldn't get worse, yesterday, the New York Times reported the same Russian groups who hacked the DNC during the 2016 election also were involved in cyber attacks on the State Department while Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State. Joining me now for reaction is Peter Schweitzer, president of the Government Accountability Institute, and Harmeet Dillon, the RNC committee woman from California. Thank you both for being here. Peter, one of the things that I'm so concerned about here is why, now that we've had exposure, time to digest it, and the media is bringing it up again, a la the New York Times, about this hacking, and why is it that this started not as a criminal investigation, but a counterintelligence operation?
Well, that's a great question, Jason. And here's the problem. As you look at every step of this investigation of the Clinton email scandal, you have sloppiness on the part of the FBI. But the problem is the sloppiness always redounds to the benefit of the Clintons, which leads one to only conclude that there was an effort to essentially want this story to go away or not hold the Clintons accountable. I mean, keep in mind also, in addition to what you just reported, Hillary Clinton destroyed, deleted 30,000 emails. And as you pointed out in the introduction, when those emails are created, they are by nature classified. So you have a situation where she was probably also deleting large amounts of classified information, and yet there's no account. There's no accountability whatsoever. This is the deep rot of the FBI. It requires further investigation, and this is what drives people crazy about criminal justice in America. There's a different set of standards for people in power, particularly those politically connected by the Clintons, and those same rules do not apply to ordinary Americans.
Harmeet, as you look at this and you see this, I mean, I had worked on this for a long, long time, and you worry that justice doesn't have a blindfold, that it's looking two different directions. But when President Trump goes out and admits that, yes, Russians were working to, in a very negative way, very aggressive way against the United States interests, that they were hacking, but also mentions that it perhaps was others, and then you can go back and refer to these reports which confirm that. The media is nowhere on this. They don't report it. They didn't report it then, and they don't report it now.
Yeah, absolutely, Jason. And, in addition to everything that Peter said, which I agree with, a couple of other facts, we also know that Hillary Clinton had been warned and was aware that her BlackBerry, which is not secure, was not allowed to be used in her State Department offices, yet she used it, and that may be tied to some of these leaks. We also know from recent testimony and facts that have come out that apparently out of those 30,000 emails, all but 4 of them were actually auto-forwarded to some foreign power that we don't know. And Louis Gohmert has been very insistent on Fox News and elsewhere, saying that the elsewhere was not Russia. So it was some other foreign power where these emails ended up. Michael Flynn has been saying this since 2015 as well, that multiple sources have attempted to and perhaps have had access. And with all of this morass and all of this building up of facts, you have James Comey with Peter Strzok's assistants concluding that, this was sort of carelessness as opposed to gross negligence or, criminal in nature. And so clearly it's a different set of facts for you and for me. And, one more thing that I want to add here is that there's been a lot of hullabaloo in the media about the president being told right before his inauguration that the Russians had been attempting to target the United States and hacking. You know, remember that the same time frame, 2 weeks before his inauguration, James Comey is telling the president-elect that the Russians have this compromat on him that involves, you know, this P tape and this other nonsense that's not true. So you have to remember the context in which all of this.
Well, yeah, and you also had President Obama going before the world and saying, well, look, nobody could do this even if they tried, so don't even worry about it. Now, Peter, Tucker Carlson is reporting tonight, and the Washington Examiner, I'm reading here a headline following up on Tucker Carlson's report. Robert Mueller offers Tony Podesta immunity to testify against Paul Manafort. That's the report that's coming out tonight. Why? I mean, we're looking at this. I'm springing this on you. We're just seeing it here at Fox. Yeah. All of a sudden, Tony Podesta is suddenly getting immunity. But is that typical? I mean, why do they? It always seems like the Clintons and people associated with the Democrats get immunity before they even go through the investigation.
Yeah, I mean, if this reporting is accurate, and I have no reason to believe it's not, I mean, it's a little bit like, you know, granting immunity to Bonnie to get at Clyde. The root of the problem with Paul Manafort, and there are many, and I think they need to be investigated and he needs to be held into account, a lot of it involves the Foreign Agent Registration Act, FARA, and the fact that he was doing a lot of work for foreign clients, lobbying work or consulting work, and he was not revealing that or registering with the Department of Justice. Well, guess what? Tony Podesta was also doing very similar things. And in fact, when the investigation really picked up steam on Paul Manafort, what did Tony Podesta do? He went and filed a lot of FARA reports with the Department of Justice going back previous years because he had failed to register before. So again, this question of justice, why is it that the FARA violations of Paul Manafort should be prosecuted? Not, by the way, I believe they should be if they're real. Right. But why in the case of Tony Podesta are they not? It's mystifying, and it's only going to further frustrate Americans who, again, believe there are different standards.
Well, and that's why you have to look at Mark Elias, who's general counsel, Hillary Clinton, general counsel, DNC, involved in the Podesta group. This is quite a web. But who starts to get the immunity? Oh, it's those that are the Democrats in this case. Harmeet, I'm sorry, I wish we had more time. Peter, thank you so much for joining us. They're back. Governor Mike Huckabee joins us next to discuss why the Obamas all of a sudden are getting back into the political fray. Welcome back. Are the Obamas plotting a political comeback? It sure seems like it, with the former president taking thinly veiled shots at President Trump while in South Africa this week.
Look around. Strongman politics are ascendant, suddenly, whereby elections and some pretense of democracy are maintained, the form of it, but those in power seek to undermine every institution or norm that gives democracy meaning.
And Michelle Obama is back in the public spotlight, starring in a so-called nonpartisan PSA with other celebrities that encourages voter registration. Joining me now to explain what's going on here is Mike Huckabee, a Fox News contributor and former governor of Arkansas. Governor, thank you so much for being here. We're about 80 days before the midterm. The first ballots in the midterm will be cast. And suddenly the Obamas are entering the political stage. What do you see going on here?
It makes a lot of sense because they're a lot more popular than virtually any other Democrat. And putting them on the stage gives, the mainstream Democrats kind of a little taste of nostalgia. I mean, if you've got a choice between listening to Barack Obama, Michelle Obama, or Hillary Clinton, it gets to be pretty easy as to who you want in the spotlight. And, I listened to the former president's speech. I didn't think it was that outrageous. He didn't call out President Trump by name. It was pretty mild, especially by President Obama's standards when he was in office, when he often called out people by name. So, more power to him. I think if Republicans have some people that we want to trot out, that's great. And frankly, this makes sense because you don't want to put Maxine Waters. You don't want to put Elizabeth Warren. You don't want to put Hillary out there. And right now, that's all they've got talking.
So the Democrats have come up with a new slogan. They dumped the one that they had. They tried to unveil a new one. I believe it's for the people. I mean, I see a party without a leader, you know, begging, hoping for Barack Obama days. But then I also don't see a message in terms of policy. What do you see?
Well, their message is, vote for us. We'll reverse all those tax cuts and take that money back from you and put it in the government's hands. We'll open up the borders. You really won't be safe in a lot of cities. And, you know, we want to reverse the economic gains that we're making and take those bonuses back. I mean, that's their message. I mean, the Democrats' campaign moniker this year really ought to be something like, we're so cool that we can get rid of ICE, because that's their whole message. They got nothing other than impeach 45, as Maxine Waters likes to scream at the top of her lungs. That's not a message.
I mean, have you ever seen a party or even a candidate who just wants to dismantle law enforcement, that hates law enforcement? There are tens of thousands of ICE agents out there protecting us every day. How do you win at the national level by just trying to disparage federal employees? I never thought I'd see Democrats doing that.
Well, it doesn't seem to be a very smart strategy, and I think overwhelmingly American people appreciate, respect law enforcement. We know that the police are underpaid, overworked, overstressed. They do a job that most of us wouldn't do for 10 times the money, and we're grateful for what they do and the risk they take every single day. And for Democrats to have the attitude that we don't want law enforcement, we want open borders, we want a government that is not held to be accountable for the things they do, that's not where I think the American people are. So they're going to either have to come up with a message. Right now they're just looking for messengers, and that's where Barack and Michelle Obama come in. I think that's a smart move on their part if they can get them to be active. But they still have to have a message, and it has to be bigger than other than Donald Trump.
Let me pay a quick bite of Joe Biden, because he seems to be making some rumblings. It's Trump talking about Biden.
Okay. Who do you think your Democratic opponent will be? Joe Biden says he'll make a decision by January.
Well, I dream about Biden. That's a dream. Look, Joe Biden ran 3 times. He never got more than 1%. And President Obama took him out of the garbage heap, and everybody was shocked that he did. I'd love to have it be Biden.
Biden or Holder? Which one do you think? Which one's going to be there?
Well, either one of them. I mean, but especially if it's Biden. Think about this. We're really looking at kind of a new Democratic movie called Back to the Future, and Joe Biden rolls in the DeLorean and talks about the good old days. I mean, this would be a dream team for the Republicans. You got Biden, Governor Elizabeth Warren, Hillary still making noise. Please, God, let it be.
Yeah, no new fresh blood there. Governor Huckabee, thank you very much. I appreciate you joining me. What do Republican candidates around the country really think about President Trump? A candidate for the Senate in Michigan will tell us next.